Mechanic jumps into lake and saves woman in distress. But when she wakes up, everyone is shocked. Thomas Mitchell was wiping his hands on a rag stained with grease when he heard the desperate screams coming from the lake. It was a hot March afternoon in Pine Lake, and the sound echoed through the small mechanic's shop like a cry for help that pierced his soul. Without thinking twice, the 55-year-old man dropped the wrench and ran toward the shore. His heavy boots sank into the damp earth as his eyes searched for the source of the screams. That's when he saw her, a woman in a red dress, struggling in the dark waters of the lake, clearly in despair. Thomas didn't hesitate for a second. He only took off his boots and dove in, clothes and all, into the cold water. His muscular arms, strengthened by decades of fixing cars, cut through the water with determination as he swam toward the woman. She was almost out of strength when he reached her. Her brown hair stuck to her face, her eyes closed. Carefully, Thomas slipped his arm under her shoulders and began pulling her toward the shore. His calloused hands held her delicate body with the same gentleness he used to repair fragile parts. The woman's breathing was weak, but she was still alive. When they finally reached the shore, a few people had already gathered, drawn by the commotion. Thomas carefully laid the woman on the grass, checking if she was breathing. His fingers trembled slightly as he felt for her pulse, searching for a heartbeat. It was then that she opened her eyes. They were deep brown eyes that seemed to carry an ancient sadness. The woman looked directly at Thomas, who was kneeling beside her, and whispered a single word that made his world stop. "Daddy." The shock hit Thomas like a lightning bolt. His eyes widened, and he felt his heart race in his chest. That face, those eyes, that voice. It was impossible, but at the same time undeniable. The woman before him was the exact image of his daughter Emily, who had left home 20 years ago after a terrible argument. "Emily," whispered Thomas, his hands shaking as he gently touched her face. "My daughter, is that you?" But the woman's reaction was completely unexpected. She pulled away abruptly, pushing Thomas forcefully, and looking around with confusion and fear. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from the water she had swallowed. "Why are you calling me that? I don't know you." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video, and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The small crowd that had formed fell into absolute silence. Thomas remained on his knees, looking at the woman with a mixture of desperation and confusion. How could she not remember him? How could she be identical to his daughter and not know who he was? "Ma'am, you work at Mr. Johnson's restaurant, right?" said a familiar voice. It was Jason, the owner of the small restaurant by the lake, a man in his 40s who always greeted Thomas when he passed by the shop. He approached with a clean towel. "Jessica, what happened? How did you end up in the water?" asked Jason, wrapping the towel around the woman. "Jessica." Thomas repeated the name, feeling as if each letter were a stab. "That's not my daughter's name." "Sir, with all due respect," said Jason, helping the woman to her feet, "but Jessica has been working at my restaurant for 3 months. She arrived here with nowhere to stay, and I gave her a chance." Thomas slowly stood up, taking his wet wallet from his back pocket. With trembling hands, he opened a small compartment and took out a photograph yellowed by time. It was a picture of a young woman of 25, smiling next to an old car. "Look at this," said Thomas, extending the photo to the group. "This is my daughter Emily, taken just a few days before she left home. Look at her face, and look at this woman's face." The silence that followed was deafening. Even wet and shaken, the resemblance between the woman from the lake and the young woman in the photo was impossible to deny. Every feature, every curve of the face, even the way she slightly bit her lower lip when she was nervous. "This is impossible," murmured Mrs. Wilson, a 70-year-old woman who lived near the lake. "They're two different people, right? They have to be." But the woman who now went by the name of Jessica was staring intently at the photo, a strange expression crossing her face. She raised her right hand and touched her own cheek, as if trying to recognize herself. I don't understand," she said, her voice coming out weak. "Why do I feel like I've seen this picture before?" Thomas took a step forward, his heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. My child, please try to remember. Your name was Emily Parker Mitchell. You lived with me in the workshop up there. You liked to help me fix cars on the weekends. You had a necklace with a small golden heart that I made myself with the workshop's soldering iron. The woman instinctively brought her hand to her neck, where there was indeed a delicate necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. She looked down, touching the piece as if seeing it for the first time. "How do you know about this necklace?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. Jason intervened quickly, seeming uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Look, folks, Jessica is clearly shaken. She needs medical attention and rest. Let's leave this conversation for later." "No." Thomas positioned himself in front of Jason. "This woman is my daughter, I am absolutely certain. I've waited 20 years for this moment." "Mr. Mitchell," said a calm voice behind him. It was Dr. Harris, the retired doctor who lived at the end of the street, a man with graying hair who had cared for half the local population throughout his career. "Let me examine the young lady. Perhaps we can clarify a few things." Jessica looked around, still visibly confused and frightened. Her eyes stopped on Thomas several times, as if something in his face awakened distant memories she couldn't quite reach. "All right," she said finally. "But I really don't remember you, sir. I only remember the last 3 months, since I started working at the restaurant." Dr. Harris approached and began a basic examination, checking Jessica's eyes with a small flashlight he always carried with him. He murmured after a few minutes. "Have you had any head trauma recently?" I don't know," replied Jessica. "I can't remember anything before 3 months ago. The first thing I remember is sitting on the road all hurt, and Mr. Jason found me." "Interesting," said the doctor, carefully running his fingers over her scalp. "There's a scar back here, very small, but it indicates significant trauma. That could explain the memory loss." Thomas felt a mixture of hope and despair growing in his chest. If his daughter had suffered some accident and lost her memory, that would explain why she didn't remember him. But it also meant she had been through something terrible. "Doctor," said Thomas, trying to keep his voice firm, "is it possible for a head trauma to make someone forget 20 years of life?" "It's rare, but possible, especially if there was a strong emotional trauma associated with the physical one. The mind sometimes blocks painful memories as a form of protection." Jason seemed uneasy with the conversation. "Look, everyone, Jessica needs to get back to the restaurant. She has work to do and I need her there." "Work?" Thomas looked at Jason with surprise. "She almost drowned just now and you want her to go back to work? The restaurant doesn't stop, Mr. Thomas, and besides, she lives in the back of the establishment. It's the safest place for her right now." Something in Jason's tone bothered Thomas deeply. There was a strange hurry, almost a desperation to get Jessica back to the restaurant as quickly as possible. Dr. Harris also seemed to notice. "Jason, the young lady just went through a trauma. She should rest at least until tomorrow." "Doctor, with all due respect, but I know Jessica better than you. She prefers to stay busy. That's how she deals with things." Thomas watched Jessica's face during this conversation. She seemed uncomfortable, almost afraid of contradicting Jason. When her eyes met Thomas's, he saw something he recognized immediately. It was the same look Emily had when she was a child and felt cornered. "Jessica," said Thomas softly, "do you want to go back to the restaurant now, or would you prefer to rest a bit?" She glanced quickly at Jason before answering. I think it's better to go back. Mr. Jason is right. I feel better when I'm working." But Thomas noticed her answer sounded rehearsed, as if she was afraid of giving the wrong answer. "Then it's decided," said Jason, taking Jessica by the arm. "Let's go, Jessica. You can take a hot shower and change." As they walked away, Thomas stood still on the lakeshore, the wet photo still in his hands. Mrs. Wilson approached him. "Thomas, I knew your daughter when she was little. That girl is the spitting image of her, there's no denying it." "I know, Mrs. Wilson, I know, but how to prove it if she doesn't remember anything?" "Sometimes memories come back little by little, son. You can't give up now." Dr. Harris joined the conversation. "Thomas, I remember when Emily was born. I delivered her myself at your house because there wasn't time to get to the hospital. That woman has exactly the same eyes, the same birthmark on her left wrist. Thomas looked at the doctor with surprise. Birthmark? A small star-shaped mark. Your daughter had it since she was a baby. I saw it today when I examined Jessica. It's there, exactly in the same place. Thomas's heart raced. Emily's birthmark had always been a unique characteristic of hers. It was impossible for two people to have exactly the same mark in the same place. Doctor, this means that... It means you are most probably right. That woman is your daughter. The question now is to find out what happened to her and why she doesn't remember. Thomas looked in the direction of the restaurant where Jason had taken Jessica. Something wasn't right. The man's hurry to get her away from him, the way she seemed afraid to contradict him. All of this awakened a protective instinct Thomas hadn't felt in years. Doctor, I need to find out the truth. I need to help my daughter recover her memory. I can help, Thomas, but it will require patience. Cases of traumatic amnesia are complex. Forcing memories can be harmful. Mrs. Wilson held Thomas's arm. Son, you have to be careful. If that girl really is your Emily, she went through something very bad to be like this. And that Jason, I never liked him much. I always thought he took too much advantage of people who needed help. Thomas felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. If someone was taking advantage of his daughter in a moment of vulnerability, he wouldn't let that slide. Mrs. Wilson, have you noticed how Jessica lives? How she's treated at the restaurant? Well, Thomas, I go there sometimes for coffee. The girl works very, very hard indeed. She's there from early morning until late at night, and always in that simple, somewhat tired-looking clothing. Jason always says she's very grateful for the opportunity he gave her. Perhaps too grateful, murmured Dr. Harris. A person with amnesia becomes completely dependent on those who help them. It's easy to manipulate someone in that condition. Thomas Mitchell clenched his fists. The idea that someone could be exploiting his daughter made him furious. But he needed to be smart. If he acted rashly, he might push Jessica away even further. Doctor, how can I help her recover her memories without forcing anything? Gradual exposure to familiar elements, places, objects, people that were part of her life before. But it has to be done carefully and at her own pace. Thomas looked up at his auto repair shop on top of the hill. It was there that Emily had grown up, after her mother had left when she was just 5 years old. It was there that they had shared the best and worst moments of their lives. I will bring her back, said Thomas, more to himself than to the others. No matter how long it takes, I will help my daughter remember who she is. As he walked back to the shop, Thomas remembered the last conversation he had with Emily 20 years ago. She had fallen in love with a man Thomas completely disapproved of. They were too young, he said. They needed to wait to get to know each other better. But Emily was determined to get married and leave home. The fight had been terrible. Harsh words were said on both sides. Emily accused Thomas of trying to control her life, of not wanting her to be happy. Thomas in turn said she was too immature to make such important decisions. The next morning, when Thomas woke up, Emily was gone. She took only a small suitcase and left a note saying she would return when he was ready to accept her choices. 20 years had passed since then. 20 years of regret, of wondering where she was, if she was okay, if she was happy. Thomas had hired private detectives in the first few years, but they never found any trace of her. It was as if Emily had simply vanished from the world. And now she was there, just a few meters away, but remembering nothing. It was a cruel irony. Fate had returned his daughter to him, but had taken away all the memories they shared. Arriving at the shop, Thomas went straight to the small room in the back where Emily used to sleep. He had never changed anything there. The bed still had the same floral quilt. The walls were still decorated with posters of bands she liked as a teenager. On the small desk were still some of her belongings, a box of colored pencils, a few books, a photo of the two of them on a trip to the zoo when she was 15. Thomas picked up the photo and smiled sadly. Emily was laughing in the picture, making a funny face for the camera. It was then that he noticed something he hadn't seen before. In the corner of the photo, very small, was a date, March 2003, and next to the date, someone had written in tiny handwriting, "Best day of my life." Thomas felt his eyes well up. He remembered that day perfectly. Emily had fought with some friends at school and had been sad for a week. To cheer her up, Thomas decided to close the shop for a day and take her on a special trip to Miami. They had spent the whole day at the zoo, eating cotton candy and laughing like two children. At the end of the day, on the way back home, Emily had said she wanted to be a veterinarian to care for animals like the ones they had seen. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing, Thomas put the photo in his pocket and left the shop. He had an idea. If Emily had lost her memory due to trauma, perhaps gradual exposure to elements from her past could help unlock some memories. He walked down the hill toward the restaurant. It was a small wooden building with porches that overlooked the lake. It had always been a popular spot among locals and some tourists who visited Pine Lake. When he entered, he found Jessica serving tables, wearing a simple uniform and an already dirty apron. She had changed out of the wet red dress into work clothes but still seemed shaken by the incident at the lake. Jason appeared immediately when he saw Thomas. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mitchell. What can I get for you?" "I'd like to speak with Jessica if possible." "Look, she's quite busy right now. We have many customers and—" "Jason," Thomas interrupted, trying to keep his voice calm. "I just want to talk to her for a few minutes. I won't interfere with her work." Jessica approached, carrying a tray with empty plates. "It's all right, Mr. Jason. I can speak briefly with you, sir," she said, looking at Thomas with curiosity. Jason didn't seem pleased, but reluctantly nodded. 5 minutes, no more. Oh. Thomas chose a table in the corner, away from the other customers. Jessica sat across from him, her hands folded on the table. "How are you feeling?" asked Thomas. "Better, thank you. You saved my life today. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." Jessica studied him for a few seconds. "Why are you so sure that I am your daughter?" Thomas took the photo from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Besides the physical resemblance, which is undeniable, you have all of her characteristics. The birthmark on your wrist, the way you bite your lip when you're nervous, even the way you hold a cup." Jessica looked at her own hands and then at the photo. "I sometimes have strange dreams. I dream of a mechanic's workshop with the smell of oil and grease. I dream of someone teaching me how to change a car tire." Thomas's heart raced. "Emily always liked helping me in the workshop. She knew how to change tires, check oil, even do small repairs. She said she wanted to learn everything I knew." "Why did she leave?" Jessica asked suddenly. The question took Thomas by surprise. "Why do you want to know?" "I don't know. I just feel it's important." Thomas sighed deeply. "We had a fight, a very bad fight. She wanted to marry a young man I thought wasn't good for her. I said things I shouldn't have said. She did too. The next morning, she was gone." Jessica absorbed this information in silence. "And you never heard from her again?" "Never. I searched for years, but she simply vanished. That must have been very painful. It was the worst thing that ever happened in my life. Losing my daughter because of pride and stubbornness." Jessica reached out and briefly touched Thomas's hand. The touch was gentle, but Thomas felt a familiarity that gave him chills. "If I really am your daughter," she said softly, "and if I get my memory back, do you think we could talk about what happened, about this fight?" "Of course," said Thomas, his voice choked. "More than anything in the world, I would like to have that conversation." Jason appeared at the table before Jessica could respond. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need Jessica in the kitchen now." Jessica stood up immediately, almost like an automatic reflex. "Of course, Mr. Jason." Before walking away, she looked at Thomas one more time. "Mr. Mitchell, could you show me your workshop someday? Maybe that will help me understand these dreams." "Whenever you want," replied Thomas. "The door is always open for you." After Jessica walked away, Thomas remained seated at the table, watching her work. There was something about her movements that bothered him. She always seemed to look in Jason's direction before doing anything, as if she needed constant approval. Other restaurant customers also seemed to treat Jessica strangely. Some made comments about her in the third person, as if she weren't there. Others simply ignored her completely. Thomas finished his coffee and got up to pay. Jason came over with the bill. "I hope you understand Jessica's situation," Jason said in a low voice. "She's a good employee, but she has problems. These fantasies about having a family, about having had a different life, they're common in people who have suffered trauma." "Fantasies?" Thomas stared at him. "Jason, you saw the resemblance between her and my daughter. How do you explain that?" "Coincidence, Mr. Mitchell. The world is full of people who look alike, and the mind of someone desperate to find a loved one can see similarities where none exist." Thomas felt anger growing in his chest, but he controlled himself. "And if she wants to come to my workshop, you won't stop her, will you?" "Of course not," said Jason, but his tone suggested otherwise. "I just hope you don't fill her head with false ideas. She's suffered enough." Walking back home, Thomas reflected on the conversation. There was something deeply wrong with the way Jason talked about Jessica. It was almost possessive, as if she were his property. Arriving home, Thomas decided to do something he hadn't done in a long time. He called his sister Mary, who lived in Chicago. "Thomas," Mary's surprised voice came from the other end of the line. "It's been so long. Is everything all right?" "Mary, I need to tell you something that might sound crazy." Thomas told his sister the whole story, from the rescue at the lake to the conversation at the restaurant. Mary listened in silence until he finished. "Thomas, are you absolutely sure it's her?" "I am, Mary. It's Emily. I know it seems impossible, but it's her." "And she really doesn't remember anything?" "Nothing from the last 20 years. Only the last 3 months." "My God, Thomas. If she really is our Emily, what on earth happened to her all these years?" "I don't know, Mary, but I'm going to find out, and I'm going to help her get her memory back." "Do you want me to come there? I can take a bus today." Thomas thought for a moment. "Not yet, Mary. Let me try to get closer to her first, gain her trust. If you show up suddenly, it might scare her even more." "All right, but keep me informed of everything, please." "I promise." After hanging up, Thomas sat on the porch of his house, looking at the lake where it had all begun a few hours earlier. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. He remembered all the afternoons he spent there with Emily when she was little. They used to sit on the same porch, and she would tell him about her day at school, about her friends, her dreams. Now she was there, so close and yet so far away. It was like having a ghost from the past materialize before him, but without a soul, without memories to connect them. Thomas made a decision. The next morning he would start his own investigation. He would find out everything about Jessica's last 3 months, about how she had arrived in Pine Lake, about her relationship with Jason, and most importantly, he would find out what had happened to make her lose her memory. That night Thomas could barely sleep. His mind was full of plans and possibilities. He mentally organized everything he knew about amnesia, everything he had read over the years about people who lost their memory after trauma. In the early hours of the morning, he went to Emily's room and stood there for a long time, imagining her sleeping in the bed, as she did when she was a child. He gathered some items that might help awaken memories: the teddy bear she adored, a bracelet he had given her for her 18th birthday, a letter she had written to him on Father's Day when she was 12. When the sun rose, Thomas was already up, making coffee and planning his day. First stop, talking to Mrs. Wilson to learn more about what she had observed about Jessica. Second stop, a casual visit to the restaurant to observe the dynamic between her and Jason. Third stop, a conversation with Dr. Harris about safe methods to help with memory recovery. Around 8 in the morning, Thomas walked up the hill to Mrs. Wilson's house. She was watering her plants on the porch, as she did every morning. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson. May I speak with you for a bit?" "Of course, Thomas. I imagine it's about that young lady from the lake." They sat on the porch and Mrs. Wilson served fresh coffee. "Mrs. Wilson, you said yesterday you've noticed how Jessica lives. Can you tell me more details?" She sighed. "Thomas, that girl works from sun up to sundown. I wake up at 5 in the morning and already see a light on in the restaurant's kitchen. I go to bed at 10 at night and she's still cleaning tables." "And Jason? How does he treat her?" Thomas, that bothers me so much. He talks to her as if she were a child who knows nothing, always telling her what she should do, where she should go, who she should talk to. Have you spoken with her? A few times. She's a sweet girl, but she always seemed afraid, as if she were walking on eggshells all the time. Afraid of what? Of doing something wrong, of displeasing Jason. I've seen her trembling when he raised his voice to speak with other employees. Thomas felt his blood boil. Has he ever mistreated her in front of you? I've never seen him hit her, if that's what you're asking. But there are other ways to mistreat a person, right, Thomas? Mrs. Wilson was right. Psychological control could be as harmful as physical aggression, especially for someone in a vulnerable state. Mrs. Wilson, do you know anyone who might have seen how Jessica arrived in Pine Lake? You should talk to Mr. Thompson, who has the gas station at the town entrance. He sees everyone who comes and goes from here. Thomas thanked her for the information and walked down towards the gas station. Thompson was a man in his 60s who had known Thomas since he was a boy. Thomas, good to see you, son. I heard you saved a young lady at the lake yesterday. Yes, Mr. Thompson, in fact, that's what I want to talk to you about. Thomas told the story and asked if Thompson remembered seeing Jessica arriving in town. Oh, yes, I remember her. It was about 3 months ago, more or less. She was in a pitiful state, poor thing. Torn clothes, hair all messy, looked like she'd been in an accident. Was she on foot? She was. Coming down the main road, walking very slowly, as if she were in pain. I stopped what I was doing and went to talk to her, but she didn't seem to really understand what I was saying. What do you mean? She would answer, but kind of confused, you know, as if she were a bit dazed. I offered water, food, but she only wanted to know if there was some place she could work in exchange for a roof. And then? That's when Jason showed up, said he could give her an opportunity at the restaurant. At the time it seemed like a kind gesture, but now what, Mr. Thompson? Now I keep wondering if he didn't see an opportunity for cheap labor. The girl works harder than 2 employees, and I bet she earns a pittance. Thomas thanked him for the information and headed to the restaurant. It was almost 10 in the morning and business was still slow. Jessica was cleaning tables, wearing the same uniform as the day before. When she saw him come in, her eyes lit up slightly. Good morning, Mr. Thomas. Good morning, Jessica. How are you today? Much better, thank you. Jason had just left the kitchen. Mr. Thomas, it's good to see you here. What would you like today? Just a coffee, thank you. Jessica brought the coffee, and when Jason moved away, Thomas took the opportunity to talk. Jessica, do you remember anything about how you arrived here in Pine Lake? She shook her head. I only remember being very confused and hurt. Mr. Jason said he found me on the road and offered me work. And don't you think it's strange not to remember anything before that? Of course I do. But the doctor who examined me when I arrived said it was normal after a head trauma. What doctor? A doctor that Mr. Jason knew. He said I had hit my head and that my memory would return in time. Thomas sensed something suspicious. Why hadn't Jason taken Jessica to Dr. Harris, who was the local doctor? Why seek out an unknown doctor? Jessica, would you like to get a second opinion with Dr. Harris, the doctor here in town? Before she could answer, Jason appeared next to the table. Sorry to interrupt, but I need Jessica in the kitchen. Mr. Jason, said Thomas, trying to stay calm, I was inviting Jessica for a medical checkup just to be sure she's all right after yesterday's incident. That's not necessary. She's already been examined and is fine. But Dr. Harris specializes in trauma cases. He could help with the memory issue. Jason's expression hardened. Mr. Thomas, with all due respect, Jessica is under my care. I know what's best for her. Under your care? Thomas stood up. She's not a child, Jason. She can decide for herself. She has memory problems. She's not in a condition to make important decisions. I am right here, said Jessica suddenly, her voice firmer than Thomas had ever heard it before. And I would like to speak with Dr. Harris, yes. Jason looked at her with an expression Thomas did not like one bit. Jessica, you don't understand the complications this could bring. It's better to leave things as they are. Why don't you want her to see a doctor, Jason? Thomas asked directly. It's not that I don't want her to. It's that she's already been through a lot of trauma. Stirring all that up again could be harmful. Thomas realized Jason was lying. There was nervousness in his voice, sweat on his forehead. He was clearly hiding something. "Jessica," said Thomas, looking directly at her, "the decision is yours. Dr. Harris is a respected professional. If you want to talk to him, I can schedule an appointment." Jessica looked from Thomas to Jason, visibly torn. I need to think about it." "Of course," said Thomas. "When you decide, let me know. I'll be at the workshop." Leaving the restaurant, Thomas was sure that Jason was hiding something important. His reaction had been disproportionate. If he truly cared about Jessica's well-being, he would be happy to see her receiving proper medical care. Thomas decided to pay a visit to Dr. Harris before returning to the workshop. He found the doctor at his home, reading in the garden. "Doctor, may I speak with you about Jessica?" "Of course, Thomas. I've been thinking about her case all night." They sat in the garden, and Thomas told him about his visit to the restaurant and Jason's strange reaction. "That is very worrying, Thomas. A case of amnesia like hers should be followed by a neurologist. The fact that Jason doesn't want her to receive proper care is a huge red flag. What do you think we should do?" "First, it would be good to have access to the medical records from the examination she had when she arrived. Second, it would be important to run new tests to better understand the type and extent of the brain injury. And if Jason refuses to cooperate..." "Thomas, if this woman really is your daughter, you have legal rights. You can request an official investigation into her situation." Thomas thought about the doctor's suggestion. Involving authorities could be complicated, especially without concrete proof that Jessica was really Emily. But maybe it was necessary. "Doctor, could you perform the exams if she agreed to come here?" "Of course, and I have contacts at the regional hospital who could do more specific tests like an MRI. Thomas thanked him and went back to his workshop. He would spend the rest of the day organizing everything he had discovered and planning the next steps. In the workshop, Thomas opened an old notebook and started writing down everything he knew. 1. Jessica arrived in Pine Lake 3 months ago, hurt and confused. 2. Jason rescued her and offered her work. She was examined by an unknown doctor, not by Dr. Harris. 4. Jason refuses to let her seek proper treatment. 5. She works excessively and seems afraid to contradict him. 6. She has dreams about mechanic workshops. She has all the physical characteristics of Emily. Thomas also wrote down questions he needed to answer. 1. Which doctor examined Jessica initially? 2. Where are the medical records? 3. What really happened to her before she arrived in Pine Lake? 4. Why is Jason so interested in keeping her isolated? Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. It was almost noon when Thomas heard footsteps approaching the workshop. He looked out the window and saw Jessica coming up the hill alone. His heart raced. She stopped at the entrance to the workshop, seeming hesitant. "May I come in?" she asked. "Of course, please come in." Jessica entered slowly, looking around with curiosity. Her eyes stopped on every tool, every corner of the workshop. "It's strange," she said, "but I feel familiar here." Thomas tried to control his anxiety. "Would you like me to show you around?" "Yes, please." Thomas began to guide her through the workshop, explaining each area. When they reached the main workbench, Jessica stopped abruptly. "Here," she said, pointing to the bench. "I dreamed about this. I dreamed I was here, organizing tools." Thomas felt a shiver. That bench was where Emily always used to help him when she was younger. "How do you feel here?" Thomas asked carefully. "Safe," she replied immediately. "For the first time in a long time, I feel safe." Thomas showed her some basic tools. To his surprise, Jessica knew what they were for and even how to use them. "This one is for changing oil," she said, picking up a specific wrench. "And this one for checking brakes." "How do you know that?" "I don't know. I just do." Thomas decided to test her a little more. "Jessica, would you like to see the rest of the house?" They went up to the residential part. When they reached the kitchen, Jessica went straight to a specific cupboard and opened it. "The glasses go here," she said, and then stopped, confused. Why did I know that? Thomas was trembling. That was exactly the cupboard where Emily always kept the glasses. "Jessica, there's a room in the back I'd like to show you." They walked to Emily's room. When Thomas opened the door, Jessica froze in the doorway. I know this place," she whispered. She entered slowly, touching every object as if it were something sacred. She stopped in front of the desk and picked up one of the books. "The Great Gatsby," she read. "I hate this book." Thomas laughed, despite the tension. "Why?" "Because Daisy didn't betray Gatsby, it's obvious. Gatsby was the one who was jealous and paranoid." Thomas remembered that conversation perfectly. Emily had had to read the book for school and had been outraged by the traditional interpretation of the story. "Jessica, do you remember reading this book?" She shook her head, confused. "No, but I know it's true. I know Daisy didn't betray him." She continued exploring the room. When she found the teddy bear on the bed, she instinctively picked it up in her arms. "Teddy," she said, and then looked at Thomas with shock. "How did I know his name?" Thomas sat on the bed, feeling like his legs were going to give way. "That was my daughter's teddy bear. She called him Teddy since she was 5 years old." Jessica sat down beside him, still holding the teddy bear. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm scared." "Scared of what, dear?" "Scared of finding out who I really am. What if it's something terrible? What if that's why I lost my memory?" Thomas put his arm around her shoulders, an automatic paternal gesture. "No matter what happened in the past, what matters is that you're here now, safe." "But what if Mr. Jason is right? What if stirring up the past only brings more suffering? Jessica, you have the right to know who you are. No one can take that away from you." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Jessica got up and went to the window that overlooked the lake. "That's where you saved me yesterday." "It is." "Why was I in the water, Mr. Mitchell? I know how to swim. In the few memories I have, I know I can swim." Thomas hadn't thought of that before. If she knew how to swim, why was she drowning? "Do you remember getting into the water?" "No. The first thing I remember is thrashing about, desperate." "And before that? What were you doing yesterday before you ended up in the water?" Jessica put her hand to her forehead, concentrating. I was at the restaurant. I was cleaning tables. And then—" She stopped, her expression changing. "And then Mr. Jason got a phone call. He got very nervous." "What kind of phone call?" "I don't know, but after the call he came to talk to me. He said I needed to leave town for a few days." Thomas felt a chill down his spine. "Leave town? Why?" "He said there were people asking questions about me, people who could hurt me." "What people?" "He didn't say. He just said I should go to the lake and wait for him there, that he would come pick me up and take me to a safe place." Thomas was beginning to understand. Jason had sent Jessica to the lake for some reason. But what had happened for her to end up in the water? "Jessica, do you remember arriving at the lake?" "Sort of. I remember walking along the shore, waiting for Mr. Jason. I was very nervous. And then—" She hesitated. "And then what?" "And then I saw a car approaching. It wasn't Mr. Jason's car. There were 2 people I didn't know." "Men? Women?" "2 men. They stopped and started talking to me. They asked my name, where I was from." "And you answered?" "I said my name was Jessica, and that I worked at the restaurant. But they started asking strange questions." "What kind of questions?" "They asked if I remembered a town called Riverside, if I knew someone named Robert." Thomas mentally noted these names. "And did you?" "I don't know. When they said those names, I felt a terrible pain in my head, like someone was hammering inside. And then I said I didn't know anything, that I didn't remember anything. They insisted. One of them got a photo from the car and showed it to me." "A photo of whom?" "Of a woman who looked a lot like me, but younger. They asked if I was that person." Thomas felt his blood run cold. Someone was looking for Jessica, or rather, for Emily. "What did you say?" "I said no, that I had never seen that photo. But they didn't believe me. They started arguing among themselves. One said it was better to take me to talk to their boss. The other said it was better to leave. And then I started to run. I ran toward the lake trying to escape, but I tripped and fell into the water. I hit my head on something. Did you see if they left? I don't know. When I hit my head, everything went dark. The next thing I remember is you pulling me out of the water. Thomas was processing this information. There were people looking for Emily. Jason apparently knew about it and had tried to hide her. But who were these people, and what did they want with his daughter? Jessica, did you tell Jason about this? I couldn't. When I went back to the restaurant yesterday, he said it was better not to talk about what had happened, that it could be dangerous. Dangerous how? He said those people might come back, and that if I talked about them, they might hurt other people too. Thomas was growing more and more worried. The situation was more complex than he had imagined. Jessica, I need to ask you an important question. Do you trust Jason? She thought for a long moment. I don't know. He helped me when I had nowhere to go, but sometimes I feel like he doesn't tell me the whole truth. What kind of truth? About who I am, about how I got here. Whenever I ask questions, he says it's better not to stir up the past. Thomas made a decision. Jessica, I want to tell you something, but I want you to know you might not believe me. What is it? I think those people who were looking for you yesterday might have some connection to my daughter's past. And if you really are Emily, it's possible someone has been trying to find you for a long time. But is that good or bad? I don't know yet, but I think we need to find out together. Jessica held Thomas's hand. If I really am your daughter, why would someone be looking for me after all this time? It could be many things, maybe something related to her husband, or something that happened when she left home. You said she married someone you didn't like. What was that man like? Thomas sighed. His name was Robert. He was older than Emily, already 30 when they met. She was only 25. Jessica turned pale. Robert? That was one of the names the men asked about yesterday. Thomas felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Are you sure? Absolutely. They asked if I knew anyone named Robert. Thomas stood up and began pacing the room, trying to organize his thoughts. Jessica, I need to tell you more about Robert. Tell me. He wasn't a good person. I found out after Emily left that he was involved with dangerous people, illegal business. What kind of business? Smuggling, mostly. He used his position at a transport company to move illegal goods. And you think that Emily found out? It's possible. Maybe she discovered something she shouldn't have and had to run away. Jessica sat on the bed, hugging the teddy bear. If that's true, it means I'm in danger. Not while you're with me, Thomas said firmly. I won't let anything happen to you. But what if those men come back? We'll prepare for that. First, we'll talk to Dr. Harris about your tests. Second, we'll try to find out more about these men and what they want. And Mr. Jason? Thomas thought carefully before answering. For now, it's better not to tell him about our conversation. If he really wants to protect you, he'll understand. If he has other motives, it's better we know what they are before we trust him. Jessica agreed. Can I stay here today? I don't feel safe going back to the restaurant right now. Of course you can. This has always been your home. Thomas prepared lunch for the two of them. As they cooked together, he watched Jessica's every move. She knew where things were in the kitchen, how to use the appliances, even the spices he liked to use. During lunch, Thomas told more stories about Emily as a child. Jessica listened attentively, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking sad. She seemed like a special person, said Jessica. She was. She is, Thomas corrected. You are a special person. After lunch, they went back to the workshop. Thomas decided to test Jessica's muscle memory one more time. Want to help me check the oil in this car? Jessica went straight to the car, opened the hood, and located the dipstick without hesitation. Her movements were precise, automatic. It's a little low, she said. It needs a top-up. Thomas was moved. It was exactly what Emily would do. They were working when they heard footsteps approaching. Thomas looked outside and saw Jason coming up the hill, visibly upset. "Jessica," Thomas whispered. "Let me talk to him." Jason entered the workshop without ceremony. "Jessica, I was looking for you. Why did you leave the restaurant without telling me?" I just wanted to see the workshop," she replied, visibly nervous. "You should have asked for permission. I'm worried about you." Thomas positioned himself between Jason and Jessica. "Jason, she is not a prisoner. She can go where she wants. Mr. Thomas, you don't understand the situation. Jessica needs special care." "What kind of care?" "She has episodes. Sometimes she gets confused, disoriented. It can be dangerous." Thomas looked at Jessica, who subtly shook her head. It was clear Jason was lying. "Jason, I would like to see Jessica's medical records. The doctor who examined her when she arrived here." "That's none of your business, Mr. Thomas. If she really is my daughter, it is my business." "She is not your daughter," Jason exploded. "That's your fantasy. Jessica is my employee who needs protection." "Protection from whom?" Jason realized he had said too much. From people who might take advantage of her condition. Like you." The tension in the air was palpable. Jason looked from Thomas to Jessica several times. "Jessica, let's go. Now." "She's not going anywhere," said Thomas, stepping forward. "Mr. Thomas, you are interfering in a situation you don't understand." "Then explain it to me. Tell me the truth about how Jessica got here. Show me the medical records. Tell me about the men who were looking for her yesterday." Jason paled. "What men?" "The men who asked about Robert. The men that made Jessica run and fall into the lake. I don't know what you're talking about." But Thomas saw the fear in Jason's eyes. "Yes, you do. And you're going to tell me now, or I will call the authorities." Jason looked at Jessica one more time. "Jessica, did you tell him about yesterday?" I remembered some things," she replied timidly. "What things?" "About the questions the men asked. About Robert." Jason closed his eyes and sighed deeply. "All right, but not here. It's dangerous to talk about this here." "Where then?" "At my house. Tonight. But only you, Mr. Thomas. Jessica stays here." "Why can't she go?" "Because it's about her. And some truths are hard to hear." Thomas looked at Jessica, who nodded for him to go. "All right, what time?" "8 tonight. And Mr. Thomas, come alone." After Jason left, Thomas and Jessica were silent for a few minutes. "Do you think he will tell the truth?" asked Jessica. "I don't know, but it's the only chance we have to find out what's really happening." The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Thomas showed Jessica more corners of the house, and she continued to have familiar reactions to everything. It was as if her body remembered, even if her mind couldn't. Around 6 in the evening, Dr. Harris appeared at the workshop. "Thomas, I heard that Jessica is here. How is she?" "Better, doctor, and with some memories coming back." Dr. Harris examined Jessica again and was impressed with her improvement. "Being in a familiar environment is clearly helping. This confirms my theory that amnesia has a strong emotional component. Doctor, tonight I'm going to talk to Jason about the whole situation. He promised to tell the truth. Thomas, be careful. If there are dangerous people involved, you could be putting yourself at risk." "I know, but I need to find out what happened to my daughter." At 8 o'clock sharp, Thomas knocked on the door of Jason's house. It was a simple house in the back of the restaurant. Jason greeted him, visibly nervous. "Come in, Mr. Thomas. Would you like some coffee?" "I want answers." They sat down in the modestly furnished living room. "All right," said Jason. "I'll tell you everything. But you have to promise me you'll protect Jessica." "I promise." Jason took a deep breath. "Jessica arrived here 3 months ago, but not in the way I told everyone." "How was it?" "She wasn't alone. She was with a man who was clearly hurt and desperate." Thomas felt his heart race. "What man?" "He said his name was Robert. He said Jessica was his wife and that they were running from people who wanted to hurt them." "And you believed him?" "At first, yes, they seemed terrified. Robert said they needed a place to hide for a few days. And then? Then I realized something was wrong. Jessica was clearly injured in the head, confused, but Robert didn't want to take her to a doctor. Why? He said doctors asked too many questions, that it could be dangerous. Thomas was beginning to understand. Go on. On the second night they were here, Robert went out to get some money. He said they would leave the next day. But he never came back. What happened to him? I don't know. Jessica woke up the next day asking for him, but she clearly didn't remember exactly who he was. When I said the name Robert, she had a terrible panic attack. What kind of attack? She started screaming, crying, saying someone was going to hurt her. I took her to my doctor friend in Kingsbury, and he said she had blocked out traumatic memories. And you decided to lie about how she got here. I thought I was protecting her. If Robert was running from dangerous people, and those people found her here, you decided to have her work in exchange for protection. Jason lowered his eyes. At first it was temporary, but she was a good worker, and I needed the help. You took advantage of her. Maybe, but I protected her too. When those men showed up yesterday, I tried to hide her. Who were those men? I don't know exactly, but they asked about Robert and about a woman who might be with him. And you sent Jessica to the lake. I thought they would leave if they didn't find her. I didn't know she would fall into the water. Thomas felt anger, but he also realized that Jason, even though selfish, had tried to protect Jessica in his own way. Jason, do you have any idea where Robert might be? No, but I have some of his things that were left here. What things? Jason stood up and went to a cabinet. He took out a small suitcase from there. These are the things he left behind. Thomas opened the suitcase. Inside were men's clothes, some documents, and a photograph. It was a wedding photo. In the photo was Emily, 20 years younger, next to Robert. She was smiling, but Thomas could see sadness in her eyes. "This is my daughter," said Thomas, his voice choked up. "I knew," said Jason. "From the first day I knew there was something familiar about her, but I didn't know what." Thomas examined the documents. There was a marriage certificate between Emily Parker Mitchell and Robert Thompson Wilson. The date was 20 years ago, a few months after she had left home. "Jason, is there anything else you haven't told me?" "There is one thing. Robert mentioned a city called Riverside. He said they had lived there for the last few years." Riverside? That matches what those men asked Jessica. "Mr. Mitchell, I know I made mistakes, but I really wanted to protect her." Thomas believed Jason was being sincere now. What do we do now? If those men come back? I don't know, but I think the only way to solve this is to find out what happened to Robert and why they were running. Thomas went home with his head full of new information. He found Jessica asleep on the living room sofa, hugging the little teddy bear Teddy. He covered her with a blanket and sat in a nearby armchair, organizing his thoughts. Now he knew that Jessica was really Emily. He had the marriage certificate as proof, but he also knew she was in danger. Robert had disappeared, possibly hurt or worse, and there were people looking for both of them. Thomas made a decision. The next morning he would go to Riverside with Jessica. They would find out what had happened there, and maybe find answers about Robert's whereabouts. It was a risk, but it was the only way to give Emily the chance to recover her life completely. Around 5 in the morning, Thomas was awakened by Jessica, shaking him gently. "Mr. Mitchell," she whispered, "I think someone is outside." Thomas got up immediately and went to the window. Outside he could see the silhouettes of 2 men standing near the workshop. "It's them," said Jessica, fear in her voice. "They're the men from yesterday." Thomas picked up an old phone and called Dr. Harris. "Doctor, I need help. There are strange men here at the workshop." "I'm on my way, Thomas, and I'll bring the people from the police station." While they waited, Thomas and Jessica hid in the back bedroom. For the next 20 minutes they heard the men walking around the house, testing doors and windows. When they finally heard sirens approaching, the men fled. Dr. Harris arrived with 2 local police officers. "Thomas, are you both all right?" "We are, but those men aren't going to give up." Sergeant Reynolds, in charge of local security, heard the whole story. "Mr. Mitchell, are you certain this young lady is your daughter?" Thomas showed him the marriage certificate. I'm certain, Sergeant. And you think she and her husband were running from what? We don't know yet, but we're going to find out. Sergeant Reynolds agreed to maintain patrols in the area while Thomas and Jessica went to Riverside to investigate. But be careful, he warned. If there are people willing to come all the way out here looking for you, the situation is serious. 2 hours later, Thomas and Jessica were on the road to Riverside. During the trip, Jessica started having more memory flashes. I remember this road, she said at one point. I've traveled here before. With Robert? I think so. I remember being nervous, scared. Riverside was a bigger city than Pine Lake. Thomas decided to start the investigation at the hospitals, thinking that if Robert was hurt, he might have sought medical treatment. At the third hospital they visited, they got lucky. Yes, I remember that man, said the emergency room nurse, looking at the photo of Robert. He arrived here about 3 months ago, quite badly hurt. Hurt how? Looked like he'd been beaten, bruises, cuts, but he didn't want to file a police report. Was he alone? No, he was with a woman. She was hurt too. The nurse looked at Jessica. Funny, you look a lot like her. It was me, said Jessica. I am her. The nurse examined Jessica more closely. My God, it is you. But you were different, thinner, paler, and very frightened. What happened to Robert? To the man who was with me? He was hospitalized for 2 days. You stayed in the room with him the whole time. But on the third night, you ran away from the hospital. Ran away? Why? I don't know. But I remember you were very nervous that day. You kept looking out the window as if you were waiting for someone to arrive. And after that? We never saw you again. Thomas asked if there were more specific records. The nurse managed to access the files and discovered something important. It says here that you gave an address on Blossom Street, number 245. They might still live there. Thomas and Jessica went to the address. It was a simple house in a working-class neighborhood. When they knocked on the door, they were greeted by a woman about 60 years old. Can I help you? Ma'am, we're looking for information about a couple who might have lived here a few months ago, Robert and Emily. The woman's expression changed immediately. Are you from the police? No, ma'am. I'm Emily's father. The woman looked at Jessica and was shocked. Emily? Is it really you? My God, girl, what happened to you? You know me. Of course I know you. You and Robert lived here for almost 2 years. I'm Mrs. Anderson, the owner. Thomas felt a wave of relief. They were finally getting some answers. Mrs. Anderson, can we talk? Emily has lost her memory and we're trying to understand what happened. Mrs. Anderson invited them in. The house was small but cozy. Sit down, girl, Mrs. Anderson said to Jessica. You look thinner. Are you eating well? Mrs. Anderson made coffee and sat with them in the living room. Emily, you and Robert arrived here about 3 years ago. You seemed like good people, but always very nervous. Nervous how? Robert worked at a transport company, but he always said he had problems with his boss. You moved houses several times before coming here. What kind of problems? He never gave details, but I could tell something was wrong. Robert would get strange phone calls, sometimes in the middle of the night, and you, Emily, always seemed worried. Thomas asked the question that was stuck in his throat. Mrs. Anderson, were Robert and Emily happy together? The woman hesitated. At first they seemed to be, but in the last few months, Robert was getting more and more nervous, and you, Emily, were getting sadder. Sad why? You mentioned several times that you missed your family. You said you had a falling out with your father over a silly argument, and that you regretted it every day. Thomas felt his eyes well up. She said that? She did. And she cried a lot when she told me about the argument. She said your father only wanted to protect her, and that she had been too stubborn and proud to admit it. Jessica held Thomas's hand. I feel that, she said. Even without remembering clearly, I feel a great regret in my chest. Mrs. Anderson continued. In the last few months, Robert was receiving threats. People would call here looking for him. Sometimes strange cars would appear on the street. What kind of threats? Related to his work. It seems he had discovered something he shouldn't have, and was now being pursued. What did he discover? Emily told me in secret. The company where Robert worked was using the trucks to transport drugs. Robert found out and threatened to report it. Thomas now understood why they were being pursued. And then Robert's boss offered him money to keep quiet. A lot of money, but he refused. He said he couldn't live knowing he was helping to spread drugs. And then the threats started. Exactly. First it was phone calls. Then men started showing up at the company. Finally, they broke into your house one night. Broke in how? You were sleeping when 3 men entered the house. They beat Robert badly and threatened to hurt you, Emily, if he didn't change his mind. Thomas was horrified. And you ran away. That same night, they only took the essentials and disappeared. That was about 3 months ago. Mrs. Anderson, do you have any idea where they might have gone after here? Emily mentioned once that she knew someone in a small town near Kingsbury. She said if she needed to, she could hide there for a while. Pine Lake? Maybe. She didn't say the name. And Robert, did you see him after they ran away? Yes, I did. He showed up here alone about 15 days later. He was badly hurt and desperate. Alone? Where was Emily? He said you had separated temporarily, that it was safer that way. What did he want? He picked up a few things they had left here in a hurry, and he asked me not to tell anyone he had come back. Anything else? He left a letter for Emily. He said if she showed up here, I was to give it to her. Thomas and Jessica exchanged a look. Do you still have the letter? Yes, I do. Let me go get it. Mrs. Anderson went inside the house and returned with a yellowed envelope. Here it is. He made me promise I would only give it if I was sure it was really her. Jessica took the envelope with trembling hands. Written on the envelope was, "To my beloved Emily." May I open it? Of course, dear. It's yours. Jessica carefully opened the envelope and took out a folded sheet of paper. She began to read aloud. My dear Emily, if you are reading this letter, it means you managed to get safely to where we planned. I hope you are well and that your memory is returning. I need to tell you what happened after we separated. The men who were chasing us found me. They took me to speak with their boss. He gave me one last chance. Go back to work for them or watch you get hurt. I couldn't let that happen. I agreed to go back to work for them, but on one condition. They would leave you alone. They couldn't look for you. They couldn't hurt you. I know you will be angry with me for making this choice, but I couldn't live knowing you were in danger because of me. Don't try to find me. Don't try to go back to Riverside. The deal I made with them only works if you stay away. Find your family, Emily. I know how much you miss your father. You always spoke about him with such affection even after your fight. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to have your life back. I love you forever, Robert. When Jessica finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. Even without fully remembering Robert, she could feel the love and sacrifice behind those words. He gave himself up to protect me, she said. Thomas put his arm around her. He was a brave man. Mrs. Anderson, asked Jessica, do you have any idea where Robert might be now? No, dear. After he gave me the letter, I never saw him again. Thomas thought about the situation. Robert had made a deal with dangerous people to protect Emily, but the men who showed up in Pine Lake showed that the deal had been broken, or that other people were looking for her. Mrs. Anderson, do you know the company where Robert worked? I do. It's called Southern Transit. It's in the industrial zone. Is it still operating? As far as I know, yes, but I wouldn't go near there if I were you. Thomas agreed, but he knew they needed more information to fully understand the situation. Mrs. Anderson, thank you so much for your help. You saved our lives today. Dear Miss Imma, dear, Anderson said to Jessica, you have a father who loves you very much. I know that because you talked about him all the time. I did? You did. You said he was the most honest man you knew, that he taught you the most important thing in life was to have character. Thomas felt his chest tighten with emotion. Thank you for telling me this, Mrs. Anderson. Walking back to the car, Thomas and Jessica remained silent for a few minutes, processing everything they had discovered. Dad, Jessica said suddenly. Thomas almost crashed the car. What did you say? Dad. I remember calling you Dad. You remember? Some things are coming back. I remember you teaching me how to drive. I remember afternoons working in the workshop. I remember you making pancakes on Sunday mornings. Thomas pulled the car over onto the shoulder and hugged Jessica. My daughter. My Emily. They cried together there on the shoulder of the road, 20 years of longing and regret being healed in a single moment. Dad, forgive me for being so stubborn. You were right about Robert. No, Emily, you were right to follow your heart, and Robert proved to be a good man. He protected you when I couldn't. But now he's in danger because of me. We'll find a way to help him, too. They returned to Pine Lake late in the afternoon. Thomas called Sergeant Reynolds to tell him about the day's discoveries. "This is more serious than we thought," said the sergeant. "I'll get in touch with the police in Riverside. Maybe we can set up an operation to dismantle this trafficking ring. And Robert, if we can arrest those responsible, he'll be safe to return to a normal life." That evening, Thomas and Emily had dinner together in the kitchen of the house. It was the first meal they had shared as father and daughter in 20 years. "Dad, I remember now why we fought. You said Robert was too old for me. I said that and much more. Things I regret to this day. But you were trying to protect me. I was trying to control your life. There's a difference." Emily smiled. "Did you know I lived the first 2 years of my marriage in a town called Hillcrest?" "I didn't know that." "Robert and I were happy at first. He was kind, affectionate, but there was always a shadow over him, over his work." "The involvement with trafficking?" "At first he didn't know. He thought he was just transporting regular goods. When he discovered the truth, he wanted to get out immediately, and they wouldn't let him. No, they said he knew too much, that if he tried to leave, he would be eliminated." Thomas felt angry thinking about what his daughter had been through. "Emily, do you remember the accident that caused your amnesia?" "More or less. I remember we were running away. Robert was driving, I was in the passenger seat. Suddenly another car cut us off." "A deliberate accident?" "I think so. Robert lost control, we hit a tree. I hit my head very hard." "And Robert?" "He was conscious, he carried me out of the car. I remember him saying we had to run, that they were going to find us." "And you went to Pine Lake?" "That must have been it. The next thing I remember clearly is being on the road, confused and hurt, being found by Jason." "Where was Robert at that time?" "I don't know. Maybe he went to get help, and when he came back, I had already left with Jason." Thomas thought about the chronology of events. Robert had stayed 2 days in the hospital with Emily, then they fled. At some point they got separated, and Emily ended up being found by Jason. "Emily, do you think Robert is still alive?" "I hope so. But even if he is, he's bound by that deal he made. He can't come back to me without putting my life in danger. Unless we can arrest the people who are blackmailing him." "Do you think that's possible?" "With the police's help, yes." The next morning, Sergeant Reynolds showed up at the workshop with news. "Thomas, I managed to get in touch with an inspector from Riverside. They've been investigating Southern Transit for months." "And did they find out anything?" "They found out it's part of a much larger network. It's not just drug trafficking, it's money laundering, extortion, several things." "And Robert?" "They think they know where he is. Apparently he's being kept in a kind of disguised captivity. He works for them, but he can't leave." Emily turned pale. "He's a prisoner?" "More or less. They let him live an apparently normal life, but always watched. It's a way to ensure he won't report them." "How can we get him out of there?" "The police are planning a big operation. They'll need Robert's testimony to arrest the bosses." "Is it dangerous?" "Very. But it's the only way to give him back his freedom and safety for all of you." Thomas thought about the proposal. "What do we need to do?" "First, Emily needs to agree to be a witness too. She lived in their house. She saw things that could be important for the investigation. But she lost her memory. Her memory is coming back, and even what she remembers in fragments can be useful." Emily took a deep breath. "I accept. I want to help arrest these people, and I want Robert free." "Are you sure, my dear?" "I am. It's time to stop running." In the following days, Emily worked with the state police detectives, trying to recover and organize her memories. Each day brought back more details of the life she had lived with Robert. Thomas followed the whole process, watching his daughter become stronger and more determined with each passing day. A week later, the operation was ready. "Emily," said the officer in charge, "we managed to locate Robert. He's in a house on the outskirts of Riverside, always watched by 2 men. Is he all right?" "Apparently, yes. But he needs to know that you are safe before he agrees to cooperate with our investigation. How are we going to do that? You are going to meet him. Under our protection, of course. Is it safe?" "None of this is completely safe. But it's the best chance we have." Thomas held his daughter's hand. "I'm going with you." "No, Dad. This is something I need to do alone." "Emily." "Dad, you taught me to be brave. Now let me use that courage." The next morning, Emily traveled to Riverside, escorted by undercover police officers. The meeting with Robert had been set for a public park, where it would be more difficult for his watchers to prevent contact. Thomas stayed in Pine Lake, distressed, waiting for news. Around noon, his phone rang. "Dad?" "Emily, how did it go?" "I found him, Dad. Robert is well." "And will he cooperate?" "He will. When he found out I was safe, and that I had recovered my memory, he agreed to testify." "And now?" "Now the police will arrest the organization's bosses. Robert will be in police protection until the trial." "And after?" After we'll see what the future holds for us." 3 months later, the police operation was a success. More than 20 people were arrested, including the heads of the trafficking network. Robert testified and was fundamental to the investigation's success. Emily also gave a statement, and her recovered memories helped connect several crimes that the police had been unable to solve. One June afternoon, Thomas was working in the workshop when he saw 2 people coming up the hill. It was Emily, and beside her a 45-year-old man he recognized from the photos, Robert. "Dad," said Emily, "I'd like you to properly meet Robert." Thomas wiped his hands on his clothes and extended his hand to Robert. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what, Mr. Thomas?" "For protecting my daughter, for loving her, for being the man I failed to see 20 years ago." Robert shook Thomas's hand firmly. "Mr. Thomas, I want to ask for your blessing to restart my life with Emily." Thomas looked at his daughter, who smiled and nodded. "You have my blessing, but on one condition." "What is it?" "That you never stray from the family again. May they never face problems alone again." "We promise," said Emily, hugging her father. 6 months later, Thomas was walking Emily down the aisle of the small church in Pine Lake. She wore the wedding dress that had belonged to her mother, carefully preserved by Thomas all those years. Robert was waiting for her at the altar, free, happy, and ready to start a new life. During the ceremony, Thomas remembered how it had all begun, with a desperate dive to save a stranger in a lake. Now he knew it hadn't been a coincidence. It had been fate, returning his daughter to him and giving all of them a second chance at happiness. After the ceremony, during the celebration in the garage that had been decorated for the occasion, Mrs. Wilson approached Thomas. "Thomas, you know Emily will have to choose a last name now, right?" "What do you mean?" "She can keep Mitchell, change to Wilson, or use both." Thomas looked at Emily, who was dancing with Robert in the middle of the garage, surrounded by all the friends they had made during those difficult months. "She has already chosen," said Thomas. "She will be Emily Parker Mitchell Wilson. She wants to honor every part of her life." "And what will you all do now?" "Robert is going to work with me at the garage. Emily is going to study veterinary medicine, as she always dreamed. And I'm going to be the proudest grandfather in the world when the grandchildren arrive." Mrs. Wilson laughed. "Are you already planning for children?" "Emily is 2 months pregnant," said Thomas, smiling. "That's why they decided to marry quickly." "And are you happy?" Thomas looked around the garage, full of people he loved, saw his daughter dancing with the husband who had proven himself worthy of her, and thought of the grandson or granddaughter who would come soon. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, "I never thought it would be possible to be this happy after so much suffering. Life sometimes takes strange turns, doesn't it, Thomas?" "It does, but sometimes those turns take us exactly where we need to be." That night, after everyone had left, Thomas, Emily, and Robert sat on the porch of the house, looking at the lake where it had all begun. "Dad," said Emily, "thank you for never giving up on me." "Daughter, you are the best thing that ever happened to my life. I could never give up on you." "And now?" asked Robert. "What do we do with all this happiness?" "Now," said Thomas, "we live each day as if it were a gift, because that's what it is." They stayed there until late at night, talking, laughing, planning the future. The lake reflected the full moon, calm and serene, as if it were a mirror, showing not what had been, but what was to come. 2 years later, Thomas held his granddaughter in his arms, a little girl named Grace Elizabeth, in honor of the 2 grandmothers she would never know, but whose love lived on through the people who loved her. The garage had become the meeting place for the extended family they had created. Mrs. Wilson was the honorary grandma, Dr. Harris was the godfather, and even Jason, who had redeemed himself by helping with everything during the trial against the trafficking network, was considered part of the family. One morning, while Thomas was teaching Robert a specific welding technique, Emily entered the garage carrying Grace Elizabeth. "Dad," she said, "the little one wants to get to know her grandpa's workplace better." Thomas took his granddaughter in his arms and carried her to the workbench. "Look here, Grace Elizabeth," he said. "This is where your mommy learned that honest work is the foundation of a dignified life." The baby looked around curiously, and Thomas swore she smiled when he showed her a small wrench. "She's going to be a mechanic," said Robert, laughing. "Or a veterinarian," said Emily. "Or whatever she wants to be," said Thomas, "because she will grow up knowing she is loved unconditionally." That afternoon, Thomas received a letter. It was from a woman from Chicago who had seen the family's story on television when the trafficking network case was tried. The woman said she had also lost contact with a daughter many years ago, and that Thomas's story gave her hope. She asked if Thomas could give advice on how to search for someone who had disappeared. Thomas showed the letter to Emily. "Dad, you should help this woman." "How?" "Tell our story. Help other families who went through what you went through." "You think so?" "I do. Our pain turned into joy. Maybe we can help others turn theirs into joy too." Thomas thought about his daughter's suggestion. He had spent 20 years suffering from her absence. Now that he had recovered his family, perhaps he could use that experience to help others. "You know something," he said. "I think you're right." In the months that followed, Thomas began to receive more and more letters from people who had lost contact with relatives. He answered them all, offering support, practical advice, and most of all, hope. The workshop became an informal support point for separated families. Thomas organized support groups on weekends, where people shared their stories and helped each other. Emily, who had resumed her veterinary studies, used her free time to help with the organization. Robert contributed with his investigative experience, helping families find clues about missing relatives. 1 year later, they had helped reunite 12 families. It wasn't a high percentage considering the number of people who sought them out, but each reunion was a victory that filled everyone's hearts. One December afternoon, Thomas was in the workshop when he saw an unfamiliar car coming up the hill. 2 women got out, one about 50 years old and the other 25. "Mr. Thomas?" asked the older woman. "Yes, that's me." "My name is Teresa Reynolds. I wrote to you 6 months ago." Thomas remembered. Teresa had lost contact with her daughter 15 years earlier after a fight about drugs. "Teresa, how are you? Did you manage to find your daughter?" "I did," she said with tears in her eyes, "and I'd like you to meet her." The young woman next to Teresa stepped forward. "My name is Paula. My mother looked for me for 15 years. Your story gave us the courage to meet." Thomas was moved. "How was the reunion?" "Difficult at first," Teresa admitted. "A lot of hurt on both sides, but you were right, love is stronger than pride. And now we are rebuilding our relationship. Paula is going to be a mother in 3 months. I'm going to be a grandmother." Thomas hugged both women. "Thank you for coming to tell me. You have no idea how happy this makes me." "Mr. Thomas," said Paula, "we wanted to do something to repay your help. You don't need to repay anything." "But we want to." My mother and I decided to create an institute to help separated families. We want to use your experience and methodology." Thomas was surprised. An institute? With a proper structure, psychologists, investigators, social workers, we can help many more families than we can here. Thomas looked around the workshop. That place had been the setting for so much suffering and so much joy, but perhaps it was time to expand the work. "Let me talk with my family," he said. That night during dinner, Thomas told them about Teresa and Paula's proposal. "What do you all think?" "I think it's wonderful, Dad," said Emily. "You have a gift for helping people. But it would mean less time here at the workshop, less time with you." "Dad," said Robert, "you taught us that happiness multiplies when it's shared. This institute could be the way for you to multiply the happiness we found. And Grace Elizabeth can grow up watching her grandfather make a difference in other people's lives," added Emily. Thomas looked at his granddaughter, who slept peacefully in her mother's arms. "All right, let's do this." 6 months later, the Thomas Mitchell Institute for Family Reunification was inaugurated in Riverside. Thomas kept the workshop in Pine Lake as a residence and retreat, but spent 3 days a week working at the institute. The work was rewarding, but also emotionally draining. Thomas dealt daily with stories of suffering, loss, and hope. But every reunited family validated all the effort. In 2 years of operation, the institute had helped reunite over 100 families. The methodology developed by Thomas, combining practical investigation with emotional support, was being studied by universities and replicated in other states. Thomas became a national reference on the subject, giving lectures and writing articles. But for him, the most important thing remained the direct work with the families. One March morning, exactly 5 years after the day he saved Emily in the lake, Thomas was in the workshop preparing coffee when he heard Grace Elizabeth's cry coming from the bedroom. He went upstairs to get her and found her standing in the crib, holding her little arms out to him. "Good morning, Princess," he said, picking her up. Grace Elizabeth was 2.5 years old now, and she was a smart and affectionate child. She loved playing in the workshop and already knew the names of various tools. As they had coffee together in the kitchen, Thomas thought about how his life had changed. 5 years earlier, he was a lonely man, consumed by guilt and longing. Now he was a father, father-in-law, grandfather, and a reference for hundreds of families. "Grandpa," said Grace Elizabeth, "Mommy and Daddy are still sleeping." "They are. They worked late yesterday." "Is Grandpa going to work today?" "I am, but only in the afternoon. I'll stay with you in the morning." "I want to see the lake." Thomas smiled. Grace Elizabeth loved going to the lake where her family had been reunited. For her, it was simply a beautiful place where the fish swam. She didn't yet know the historical importance that place held for them. After Emily and Robert woke up and had coffee, the family decided to spend the whole morning at the lake. It was a beautiful sunny day, perfect for a picnic. While Grace Elizabeth played on the shore, always under careful supervision, Thomas sat on a rock and watched the scene. Emily was pregnant again, 5 months along, and radiated happiness. Robert had adapted perfectly to life in Pine Lake and was a skilled mechanic and a devoted father. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" asked Emily, sitting down next to him. "I'm thinking about how life can change in unpredictable ways. 5 years ago, I was lost. Today, I look around and see a beautiful family, work that fulfills me, a life full of purpose. And it all started here, at this lake." "No," said Thomas. "It all started a long time ago when you were born. This lake was just the place where we found each other again." Robert joined them, carrying Grace Elizabeth, who had gotten tired from playing. "Thomas, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Do you regret anything?" Thomas thought for a moment. "I regret being too proud to go after Emily when she left home. I regret missing 20 years of her life. But I don't regret the experiences each of us lived, because they brought us here. Even the suffering, especially the suffering, it taught me to value every moment we have together." That afternoon, Thomas went to the Institute in Riverside. He had a meeting with a family who was trying to find a son who had disappeared 10 years ago. They were the Roberts, a couple of shopkeepers from Denver. The son, Brian, had disappeared at 18 after getting involved with the wrong crowd. "Mr. Thomas," said his mother, Mrs. Patricia, "we've looked everywhere. We hired detectives, put up posters, offered a reward. Nothing. How long have you been searching?" 10 years. 10 years without knowing if our son is alive or—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Thomas understood their despair. It was the same despair he had felt for 20 years. "Mrs. Patricia, Mr. George, I'll be honest with you. After 10 years, the chances are smaller. But they are not zero. What do you suggest? We'll start from scratch. I will assign a full team to your case. We will review everything that's already been done and look for new angles. How much will this cost? The Institute is supported by donations. You pay nothing." The couple was visibly moved. "Why do you do this?" "Because I know what it's like to lose a child, and I know what it's like to find them again." In the months that followed, the Institute's team worked intensely on the Brian Roberts case. They used modern investigation techniques, social media, and government databases. Finally, after 4 months, they found a lead. Brian was alive, working on a farm in rural Wyoming. He had changed his name and was living a simple life, far from the drugs that had nearly destroyed him in his youth. The reunion was emotional. Brian, now 28, had become a responsible, hard-working man. He had a wife and a young son. "I always wanted to look for you," he said to his parents, "but I was ashamed of what I had done. I was afraid of disappointing you again." "Son," said Mrs. Patricia, "it doesn't matter what you did. What matters is who you are now." Thomas watched the Roberts family reunion and remembered his own reunion with Emily. Every case was unique, but the love between parents and children was always the same. 6 months later, Thomas received a special invitation. Brian Roberts was officially marrying his partner, and he wanted Thomas to be the best man. "Mr. Thomas," Brian said, "if it weren't for you, I never would have had the courage to return to my family." "You already had that courage, Brian. I just helped you find it." At Brian's wedding, Thomas met several other families that had been reunited by the Institute. It was moving to see how their work was creating a network of people connected by love and second chances. During his speech as best man, Thomas spoke about the importance of forgiveness and persistence. Sometimes we lose the people we love, not because they stop loving us, but because life leads us down different paths. The important thing is to never stop believing that love can bring us together again. After the wedding, Thomas returned to Pine Lake. He found Emily on the porch, sewing little clothes for the baby that would be born in 2 months. "How was the wedding, Dad?" "Beautiful. Brian is very happy. And you? Are you happy?" Thomas sat down next to his daughter and put his hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. "Emily, I didn't know it was possible to be this happy. Every day I wake up next to my family is a gift." "Dad, can I confess something?" "Of course. Sometimes I'm afraid that all of this is a dream, that I'll wake up and discover that I'm still lost, without my memory, far away from you." Thomas hugged his daughter. "Daughter, this is not a dream. It's real. And even if it were a dream, I would spend my whole life asleep so as not to lose you again." That night, Thomas stayed on the porch until late, looking at the lake and thinking about everything that had happened. In 5 years, his life had been completely transformed. From a lonely and bitter man, he had become the patriarch of a happy family and the leader of a movement that was reuniting families all across the country. But the most important thing was simple. He had his daughter back. 2 months later, Thomas was holding his second grandchild in his arms, a strong, healthy boy who would be named Thomas Robert in honor of his grandfather and father. "Welcome to the family, son," Thomas whispered to the baby. "You're lucky. You'll grow up surrounded by so much love." Grace Elizabeth, now 3 years old, looked at her little brother with curiosity and affection. "Grandpa, will he like playing in the workshop?" "I'm sure he will. And you're going to teach him everything, right?" "I will. I'll teach him how to use the tools and how to talk to the cars." Thomas laughed. Grace Elizabeth had inherited the love for cars and spent hours in the workshop, helping her grandfather and father. That afternoon, as the family gathered for lunch, Thomas received a special phone call. It was from the state governor, inviting him to receive a Medal of Honor for his services to the families of the state. "Dad, are you going to accept?" asked Emily. "I will, but not for me, for the Institute, and for all the families we've managed to reunite." The medal presentation ceremony was held a month later at the state capitol. Thomas was accompanied by his entire family and by representatives from several families that had been reunited by the Institute. During his acceptance speech, Thomas spoke about the importance of family and hope. "I received this medal, but it belongs to all of you who never gave up searching for your loved ones. It belongs to the mothers who have cried for years for lost children, to the fathers who can't sleep without knowing where their children are, to the children who carry guilt for having drifted away from home. This medal is to remind us that family love is the most powerful force that exists. It can overcome time, distance, resentment, and even memory loss." When Thomas finished his speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. There were many tears in the eyes of those present, including in Thomas's own eyes. After the ceremony, several people approached Thomas to tell their own stories of loss and reunion. Each story moved him and motivated him to continue his work. Returning to Pine Lake that night, Thomas sat on the porch with Emily and Robert to talk about the future. "Dad," said Emily, "have you ever thought about writing a book about your experiences?" "A book?" "Yes. Your story could inspire many people who are going through the same situation you went through. I'm not a writer, dear, but you are a storyteller, and you have important stories to tell." Robert agreed. "Thomas, I think Emily is right. Your experience could help people who don't even make it to the Institute." Thomas thought about the suggestion. Over the years, he had indeed accumulated many stories and a lot of knowledge about family reunification. "Perhaps you're right," he said finally. "Maybe it's time to tell these stories to a wider audience." In the months that followed, Thomas began to write. Every night after the family was asleep, he would sit in the kitchen with a notebook and write about his experiences. He wrote about the pain of losing Emily, about the 20 years of fruitless searching, about the magical moment at the lake, about the gradual recovery of his daughter's memory, about the work at the Institute. But mostly he wrote about love, about how love can be stronger than time, than distance, than resentment. 1 year later, the book was ready. From the Lake to the Heart, a story of loss and reunion, was published by a national publisher and became an immediate success. Thomas began receiving invitations to give lectures all over the country. His story inspired the creation of several other similar institutes in different states. One Sunday morning, 5 years after the award ceremony, Thomas was in the workshop playing with his grandchildren. Grace Elizabeth, now 8 years old, was learning how to change the oil. Thomas Robert, 5 years old, was playing with miniature cars. Emily, who had graduated as a veterinarian and opened her own clinic, entered the workshop carrying a letter. "Dad, this arrived for you today." Thomas opened the letter and read it in silence. Then he looked at Emily with a strange expression. "What is it, Dad?" "It's from the Department of Education. They want to create a national program based on the Institute's work. They want me to coordinate the project." "That's wonderful, but it would mean moving to Washington, D.C. for 2 years. Emily's smile disappeared. "Oh, exactly. I can't be away from you all for that long." Robert, who had been listening to the conversation, joined them. "Thomas, what kind of program would it be?" "A national family reunification program, with federal resources, teams in every state, a unified methodology. How many families could it help?" "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands." Robert and Emily exchanged a look. "Dad," said Emily, "you have to accept. I can't leave you. You're not leaving us. You're taking our work to the entire country. But the grandchildren, they will grow up knowing their grandfather changed the lives of thousands of families." Thomas looked at Grace Elizabeth and Thomas Robert, who continued playing unaware of the adults' conversation. "I'm going to miss you all so much." "And we will miss you. But Washington, D.C. isn't that far, and this work is bigger than our longing for you." That night, Thomas called the Department of Education and accepted the invitation. 2 months later, at a ceremony at the White House, the National Family Reunification Program was officially launched. Thomas was appointed the program's general coordinator. For the next 2 years, Thomas divided his time between Washington, D.C. and Pine Lake. The program was an extraordinary success, reuniting over 5,000 families across the country. The methodology developed by Thomas became an international reference, studied and adapted in several countries. When his term in Washington, D.C. ended, Thomas returned permanently to Pine Lake. He found his family larger and happier than ever. Emily had expanded her veterinary clinic and was treating animals from the entire region. Robert had taken over the auto repair shop completely and had become the most respected mechanic in town. Grace Elizabeth, now 10 years old, was in school and dreamed of becoming a doctor. Thomas Robert, 7 years old, divided his time between his father's shop and his mother's clinic, still undecided about which profession to follow. One March afternoon, exactly 10 years after the day he saved Emily in the lake, Thomas was sitting on the porch when he saw an unfamiliar family approaching the house. It was a couple with 2 teenage children. They seemed nervous, as if they didn't quite know what to say. "Mr. Thomas," the man asked. "That's me. My name is Carl Olsen. This is my wife Regina, and our children Peter and Anna." Thomas invited them to sit on the porch. "How can I help you?" "Mr. Thomas," said Regina, "we read your book. We came from Portland specifically to meet you." "Why?" "Because your story changed our family." Carl continued the explanation. 5 years ago, our eldest daughter Marianne left home after a terrible fight. We thought we would never see her again. But after reading your book, we decided to try again," said Regina. "We followed the methods you described." "And you found her?" "We did. She was living in Chicago, working as a teacher. She was ashamed to come home." "And now?" "Now she lives nearby. She got married 2 years ago and gave us our first granddaughter." Thomas was moved by the story. "Thank you for telling me this. You have no idea how happy it makes me to know the book helped." "Mr. Thomas," said Peter, the eldest son, "can I ask a question?" "Of course." "How did you manage to forgive? How did you not stay angry at your daughter for leaving?" Thomas thought about the question for a moment. "Peter, true love cannot live with anger for very long. In the beginning I was angry with Emily, yes. But as the years passed, I realized the anger was hurting me more than her absence. And if she had never come back? Even then, it would have been worth it to forgive. Forgiveness frees the one who forgives, not just the one who is forgiven." The family from Portland spent the rest of the afternoon with Thomas, talking about forgiveness, family love, and second chances. When they left, Thomas felt grateful to be able to share his experience and see how it continued to help people. That evening during family dinner, Thomas told them about the Olsen family's visit. "Dad," said Emily, "do you realize how many lives you've changed?" "We changed them, daughter. You, Robert, the Institute, all of us together. But it started with you," said Robert, "with your courage to jump into that lake." Thomas looked out the window toward the lake, which shimmered under the moonlight. "It wasn't courage," he said. "It was instinct. It was love. When you love someone, you can't just stand by and watch that person in danger." "And if you had known that day it was me in the water," asked Emily, "I would have jumped even faster." Grace Elizabeth, who was listening to the conversation, asked a question that surprised everyone. "Grandpa, do you think one day I'll need to be brave like you were?" Thomas looked at his granddaughter and saw in her the same determination he had seen in Emily as a child. "Grace Elizabeth, life will give you many opportunities to be brave. Some will be small, others will be big. The important thing is to be ready." "How do I get ready?" "By always remembering that love is stronger than fear." 10 years passed since that conversation. Grace Elizabeth had graduated from medical school and worked for an NGO that serves underprivileged families. Thomas Robert had become an engineer and was developing social technology projects. Thomas, now 75 years old, had officially retired from his activities at the Institute, but he continued to receive people at home and give advice about family reunification. One March morning, 20 years after the day at the lake, Thomas was on the porch drinking coffee when he saw Emily approaching. She was 45 now, a few grey strands in her hair, but the same bright smile as always. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, daughter. You woke up early today." "I wanted to talk to you before the others woke up." Thomas noticed something special in her tone of voice. "What is it?" Emily sat beside her father and held his hand. "Dad, Robert and I decided to take a special trip next month." "Where to?" "To all the places we lived together. Riverside, Hillcrest, Mrs. Anderson's house. We want to revisit our history." "That's beautiful, daughter. And we want you to come with us." Thomas was surprised. "With me?" "Dad, you were part of that story even when you weren't present. Your love was there protecting me, giving me strength." "Emily, and there's something special we want to do on the trip." "What?" "We want to find other Roberts and other Emilys, people who are going through what we went through." Thomas understood immediately. "You want to turn the trip into a mission of help." "Exactly. And who better to help us than the man who has dedicated the last 20 years to reuniting families?" Thomas felt a deep emotion. Even after all this time, his daughter continued to surprise him. "Of course I'll go with you." The trip happened 2 months later. Thomas, Emily, and Robert visited every place they had lived, talked to people who had known them, and most importantly, helped 3 families who were facing similar situations. At Mrs. Anderson's house, they found a young mother who had lost contact with her teenage daughter. Thomas and Emily helped her develop a search plan and gave her all the necessary emotional support. In Riverside, they met a man who had been searching for his father for 15 years. Robert used his contacts in the region to help with the investigation, but the most emotional moment of the trip was when they returned to the hospital where Emily had been treated after the accident. The same nurse still worked there. "My God," she said upon seeing Emily. "You're the woman who was here with amnesia. How are you?" "I'm great," replied Emily. "I recovered my memory and my family." "And this is my father," she said, introducing Thomas. The nurse was moved to hear the full story. "I'm so glad everything worked out," she said. "I always wondered what had happened to you." "Nurse," said Thomas, "you saved my daughter that night. If it weren't for the care she received here, our story might have been different. I was just doing my job. You did much more than that. You gave hope when everything seemed lost." The nurse took them to see the renovated hospital. There was now a specialized wing for head trauma and a specific program for patients with amnesia. "You inspired some changes here," she said. "After I read about your story in the newspaper, we spoke with the administration about improving our care for cases like yours." Thomas was deeply touched to learn that their experience had resulted in concrete improvements for other people. On the last day of the trip, they visited the lake for the first time since they had moved away from Pine Lake. The place remained exactly as Thomas remembered it, serene, surrounded by mountains, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror. "This is where everything changed," said Emily, looking at the calm water. "No," corrected Thomas. "This is where everything fell back into place." Robert joined them on the shore. "Thomas, can I ask you a question I've always wanted to ask?" "Of course." "That day when you jumped into the water, what went through your mind?" Thomas thought for a long moment. "Honestly, I didn't think about anything. I just felt I had to act. It was only later, when I brought her to the shore and she said, 'Daddy,' that my whole world changed." "Did you immediately feel that it was Emily?" "Deep in my heart, yes. But my mind took a while to accept it. It seemed too impossible to be true." Emily approached the water and touched the surface with her fingertips. "Sometimes I still have trouble believing that all of this really happened, that I lost 20 years of my life and managed to recover not only my memory but also my family." "Daughter," said Thomas, "you didn't lose 20 years. You lived 20 years. They were difficult years, but they were years that made you the strong and wise person you are today." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. If you hadn't gone through everything you did, we might not have had the maturity to rebuild our relationship the way we did." "And if things had been different? If I had never left home?" Thomas smiled. "Then we would have a different story to tell, but not necessarily a better one." They stayed by the lake until sunset, talking about memories, about the future, about the grandchildren who were growing up too fast. When they returned home that night, they found Grace Elizabeth and Thomas Robert waiting on the porch, eager to hear about the trip. "How was it, Grandpa?" asked Grace Elizabeth. "It was a journey of discoveries," replied Thomas. "We discovered that our story helped many other people." "And we found 3 families that we will continue to help," added Emily. Thomas Robert, now a 17-year-old young man, made an observation that surprised everyone. "Grandpa, I was thinking, our family is like a lighthouse." "How so?" "A lighthouse stays in one place, but its light reaches far and helps many people find the right path." Thomas was deeply moved by the comparison. "Thomas Robert, that is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard." "It's true, Grandpa. You stayed here in Pine Lake, but your light reached Washington, D.C., even other countries, and now it's coming home stronger." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Thomas looked around the table and felt immense gratitude. There were all the people he loved most in the world: Emily, radiant and fulfilled; Robert, who had become the son he never had; Grace Elizabeth, brilliant and determined; Thomas Robert, sensitive and wise for his age. "Family," said Thomas, raising his glass of water. "I'd like to make a toast." Everyone raised their glasses. "To the 20 years we lost and the 20 years we gained. To the lake that separated us and brought us back together. To the second chance life gave us to be happy together. And to the next generations who will continue spreading love around the world," added Emily. "Cheers!" they all said in unison. 2 years later, Thomas celebrated his 77th birthday, surrounded by an even larger family. Grace Elizabeth had married a fellow doctor and was expecting their first child. Thomas Robert had graduated as an engineer and was working on a sustainable development project. The Family Reunification Institute Thomas had founded was still operating, now run by a former student of Emily's who had specialized in family psychology. One special March morning, 25 years after the day at the lake, Thomas woke up with a strange feeling. It wasn't a bad feeling, just different. He got up slowly and went to the porch. The lake shimmered in the distance, as it always had, but that day it seemed to have a special glow. Emily appeared shortly after, carrying a cup of coffee for her father. "Good morning, Dad. How do you feel?" "Different," said Thomas honestly. "Like something important is going to happen today." "Something important is going to happen. It's the 25th anniversary of your dive into the lake." Thomas had forgotten the date. 25 years, he murmured. "How time flies." "Dad, the whole family is coming this afternoon to celebrate. Even Grace Elizabeth managed to get time off from the hospital." Thomas smiled. "And my great-grandson? How is he?" "Teddy is strong and healthy. He's already crawling and trying to say, 'Grandpa Thomas.'" Thomas was moved. He had chosen to name his great-grandson Teddy in honor of the teddy bear Emily had loved so much. During the afternoon, the house filled with laughter and conversation. 3 generations gathered to celebrate not just the anniversary of the date, but most importantly, the love that united them. Thomas was holding his great-grandson on his lap when Grace Elizabeth approached. "Grandpa, Teddy wants to give you something." She placed a small toy wrench in the baby's little hands. "For when he grows up and wants to learn to be a mechanic like his great-grandfather," she explained. Thomas held the small tool and felt as if he were holding the future. "Thank you, Teddy," he whispered to the baby. "Grandpa will keep this very dear." During the celebratory dinner, each family member made a speech about what Thomas meant to them. Robert spoke about how Thomas had taught him that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of fear. Grace Elizabeth spoke about how her grandfather's stories had inspired her to choose medicine, so she could save lives like he had saved Emily's life. Thomas Robert spoke about how his grandfather's example taught him that small actions can have big consequences. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stood up with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I could talk for hours about what you mean to me, but I'll sum it up in one sentence. You taught me that true love never gives up." Thomas stood up and hugged his daughter. "And you taught me that true love always finds its way back home." That night, After everyone had left, Thomas and Emily were alone on the porch, as they had been so many times. "Dad, can I ask you a question?" "Always." "If you could go back in time and change something, would you?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. "I would change the fight we had, the one that made you leave home. I would change the suffering you went through with Robert. I would change the years we lost together. But I wouldn't change the final outcome. I wouldn't change the family we built, the lives we've touched, the love we share. Not even knowing all the suffering that would come. Not even knowing, because the suffering taught us to cherish every moment of happiness." Emily leaned against her father's shoulder. "I love you so much, Dad." "I love you too, daughter, more than you can imagine." They stayed there in silence, looking at the lake that had changed their lives forever. Thomas felt a deep peace. His mission was accomplished. He had recovered his daughter, built a beautiful family, helped hundreds of other families reunite. If life ended at that moment, he would depart completely fulfilled. But life still had more gifts to give. The next morning, Thomas received a phone call that moved him to tears. It was from a young woman named Anna Paula from Tampa. "Mr. Thomas, my name is Anna Paula Smith. I read your book 5 years ago and it changed my life." "How so?" "I had lost contact with my mother 10 years ago after my father died. Using the methods from your book, I managed to find her." "That's wonderful to hear. But that's not all, Mr. Thomas. Inspired by your story, I started a non-profit here in the Southeast. We've already reunited over 300 families." Thomas was speechless. "Mr. Thomas, are you there?" "I am. Sorry I got emotional." "Mr. Thomas, I wanted to tell you that today, on the same day you saved your daughter 25 years ago, we managed to reunite a family that had been separated for 30 years. 30 years? Yes. A mother was reunited with the son who had been adopted when he was a baby. It was the most emotional reunion I've ever witnessed." Thomas felt as if the universe was conspiring to show him that his story was still making a difference. "Anna Paula, thank you for telling me this. You can't imagine the gift you've given me today." "Thank you, Mr. Thomas. You planted a seed that is bearing fruit all over the country." When Thomas hung up the phone, Emily was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. "Who was it, Dad?" Thomas told her about Anna Paula's call. "Dad, do you realize how many people have been touched by our story?" "Sometimes I have a vague idea, but moments like this remind me that our suffering had a greater purpose. What if I told you our work isn't finished yet?" Thomas looked at his daughter curiously. "What do you mean?" "Dad, Robert and I have been talking. We want to expand the Institute's work." "How?" "We want to create an international exchange program, bring our methodology to other countries and learn from experiences elsewhere." Thomas was excited by the idea. "That would be incredible. And we want you to be the honorary coordinator of the project." "But daughter, I'm 77 years old." "So what? Your experience is our most valuable asset." Thomas laughed. "All right, but only if you promise I won't have to move away from Pine Lake again." "We promise. The work can be done from right here, with occasional trips." In the months that followed, Thomas threw himself into the new project with the enthusiasm of a young man. He participated in video conferences with experts from various countries, helped adapt his methodology for different cultures, and gave online lectures for international audiences. The exchange program was launched 1 year later, with partnerships in 12 countries. Thomas's methodology was being applied on 5 continents. One special afternoon, Thomas received a visit that completely surprised him. It was a man about 50 years old, accompanied by a lady with graying hair. "Mr. Thomas? That's me. My name is Robert Thompson Wilson, Jr. This is my mother, Mrs. Harrison." Thomas was shocked. The man before him was the son of Robert, Emily's first husband. "How did you find me?" "Through the Institute, Mr. Thomas. We've been looking for my father for 5 years." Thomas called for Emily, who was equally moved to learn who the visitors were. "Robert had another son?" she asked. "Yes, with me," said Mrs. Harrison. "We met 30 years ago after he separated from his first wife." Thomas and Emily exchanged glances. They didn't know Robert had married again. "And why are you looking for him?" asked Thomas. "Because he disappeared 5 years ago," said Robert Jr. After we learned your story, we suspected his disappearance might be related to those people who were pursuing you." Thomas felt a chill down his spine. He had thought that part of their lives was over. "Do you have any clue where he might be?" "We suspect he's being held somewhere, forced to work for that organization." Emily held Thomas's hand. "Dad, we have to help them." "Of course," Thomas said immediately. "Robert saved my daughter. Now it's our turn to save him." In the days that followed, Thomas and his family mobilized to help in the search for Robert. They used all the contacts they had made over the years, the entire network of investigators working with the Institute. 2 weeks later, they got an important lead. Robert was being held at a farm in the countryside of Montana, working in a money laundering operation. The operation to free him was complex and dangerous, involving federal police and specialized agents, but it was successful. Robert was rescued in the early hours of an October morning, after 5 years of disguised captivity. His reunion with his son and Mrs. Harrison was emotional, but the most touching moment was when he was reunited with Emily and Thomas. "Emily," he said with tears in his eyes, "you look beautiful and happy." "Robert," she replied, "thank you for protecting me all those years, for sacrificing your freedom for my safety. It was worth it. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Thomas approached Robert and extended his hand. "Robert, forgive me for not seeing 25 years ago the good man you were. Thomas, you were protecting your daughter. I understand. And in the end, you were right about one thing. She deserved better than the dangerous life I was offering. But you changed your life for her. That proves the man you truly are." Robert spent the following months recovering physically and emotionally from his period of captivity. Thomas and his family welcomed him as part of the extended family. He settled into a small house near the lake and began working as a consultant for the Institute, helping with cases involving people held against their will. One memorable afternoon, Robert was on the porch of Thomas's house when Teddy, now 2 years old, approached him. "Gamper Zander," said the little boy, trying to pronounce the name. Robert picked up the child and looked at Thomas. "You know this is a miracle, right?" "What?" "Being here, alive, free, surrounded by family. 5 years ago, I thought I was going to die in that captivity. But you didn't die, and now you have a whole family that loves you." "Thomas, can I tell you something?" "Of course. During all those years of captivity, what kept me alive was knowing that Emily was safe and happy, imagining her married again, with children, fulfilling her dreams. And to discover that she managed to find her way back to me must have been special. It was more than special. It was the confirmation that all the sacrifice was worth it." That night, during the family dinner, Thomas made a special announcement. "Family, I've decided something." Everyone looked at him attentively. "I've decided to write a second book." "About what, Dad?" asked Emily. "About these last few years. About how our story continued. About the people we helped. About the reunion with Robert." "What will the title be?" Thomas smiled. 25 years later. When love builds bridges." Robert raised his glass. "To the second book. And to the next 25 years of stories to tell." "To the next 25 years," everyone repeated. As the family toasted, Thomas looked around the table and felt that his life was completely fulfilled. He had regained his daughter, built a beautiful family, helped hundreds of people to reunite, saved Robert, and created a legacy that would last for generations. That night, before going to sleep, Thomas went out to the porch one last time. The lake reflected the stars, calm and eternal as always. "Thank you," he whispered to the universe. "Thank you for every day, for every person you brought into my life, for every opportunity to love and be loved." A gentle breeze passed over his face, as if it were a loving response from the cosmos. Thomas went inside and went to sleep, knowing he had lived a full life, full of purpose and love. The next morning, he began writing his second book, eager to share with the world the new lessons he had learned about family, forgiveness, and the transformative power of love. End of story. And you, what did you think of this exciting journey of Thomas and Emily? Tell us in the comments which part touched you the most, and if you believe in the power of love to reunite families. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that will touch your heart.